Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. I'm Kristin, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ron Ward.
Hey, Kristin.
I love that. We sound so professional.
I haven't written my own intro because I'm being humble. You remember?
Yes.
That's my goal, but it's not going to last. I can tell you that. It's not going to last.
Go 6 weeks, and then you can just
6 weeks.
Let it come back in.
So, as many of you know, we've been taking current events, and we're doing a little bit of a leadership gauge, and this one is a doozy. That's for sure.
I know. There's so much going on. And of course, as you probably saw already in the title, this is all about the LA fires. There is a plethora of failure throughout these stories. And so what we did was we went and gathered up as many as we could find and looked for those leadership failures throughout. And we're going to break them down today. And the purpose in doing this is that it's going to help everyone when you're in leadership, or even if you're an individual contributor, it really helps you understand how things can go wrong quickly. So we're tackling a topic that has impacted millions. And this is ongoing. As we were signing on to record, Ron, I saw that there's another area that is on fire right now.
Wow. And
the failure of leadership during these California fires, particularly focusing on Newsom, but other key figures. First, our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims of this terrible fire, of these fires. And we want to express our appreciation for all of the first responders who are working diligently to put out the fires.
Absolutely. And our desire to look at leadership is so hopefully enough people hear this and other voices, and they change the leadership.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, Newsom needs to be out, and several others. It's time for citizens to continue. Well, they've already started, but it's time for citizens to start speaking up and taking a stand. So that's our goal.
Yeah.
Actually, California has been plagued by devastating wildfires in recent years. As a matter of fact, a video surfaced when we were doing our research. In 2018, President Trump met with Governor Newsom, and he said, and I quote, "Get all this cleaned out and protected.
Yeah,
You've got to take care of the floors." And Kristin, I'm going to be honest with you. My dad was a volunteer fire chief, but I didn't know that much about fires. But because of that conversation, it caused me to research. And I started learning that all of that debris around the trees is just like having kindling in a fireplace.
Right.
So we're going to get into that more. But it did, spark my interest. No pun intended. That was a bad pun. But
I did catch that. Have you talked to your dad about this?
I've not talked to my dad about the fires. My dad was in a very rural area, so I'm not sure he understands a big city fire like that.
Right.
But anyway, as you can tell, that conversation was ignored by Governor Newsom and others. And then in 2020, there was another big fire, and thousands of homes were lost and lives were disrupted, entire communities devastated.
Yeah.
And Kristin, we talked about a gap analysis. If I were fire chief after 2018 and 2020, man, would I be drawing up a blueprint.
Right.
And it would be my top priority would be getting water and fire and all that. We're going to go into it, but it is mind-boggling.
It really is.
It's not like one of these unsuspecting tragedies or emergencies. This was predicted. You could see this coming. So anyway.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that is the extreme frustrating aspect of it. We're speaking of leadership. You mentioned Newsom, and leadership rolls up. And at the end of the day, he is ultimately in control and responsible. That's how it is in corporations. You think about it, politics, there shouldn't be an exception there. So Newsom's failure to take accountability for the crisis is staggering for many. And we want to remember his dismissive comment about the locals will figure it out. I can still see the hand motions, very flippant, when he was questioned about the empty fire hydrants during the crisis. And, that kind of leadership, it really sends a dangerous message that the buck doesn't stop with him.
In my leadership course, Kristin, there's a statement that I made that great leaders take the blame and share the credit.
Oh, yes.
And when I heard him making excuses and I'm getting mixed messages. He made himself the victim of misinformation when he's the head of misinformation. A real leader steps up and says, as John F. Kennedy said, the Bay of Pigs, this is on me. The buck stops here. So in June of 2024, brace yourself, they slashed $101 million from the California's firefighting budget, reducing it to $2.6 billion while simultaneously allocating $14.7 billion toward green initiatives like zero emissions in vehicles.
Wow.
So one could argue that we have a very serious priority problem in that leadership.
Oh man, I could go in so many directions with that. But I mean, we should never be slashing our first responders. I've just never understood that. It's never gone well. We saw that here in Portland with the police department, just all over the nation. So let's focus on Mayor Karen Bass. She's the mayor of Los Angeles, was out of the country, even though she knew that fires were imminent in the area. She was in Ghana, I believe, when the fires erupted. She's facing backlash for that. And not only for her absence, but for approving that $17.6 million reduction in the LA Fire Department's budget. And Fire Chief Kristin, she spells it the same way as me, by the way, Crowley, warned that these cuts would hinder emergency responses. But sadly, her prediction has come true.
Yeah, and Chief Crowley hasn't been quiet about this. She spoke up several times about the budget cuts and the severity and what may happen, but she doesn't have a job anymore.
Yeah, talk about retaliatory, right? Like you have to always have that in the back of your mind, unfortunately.
That's absolute retaliation, and it was so obvious.
Yeah,
but
it
anyway,
really was.
I digress.
So a recent headline that I read summed it up pretty well, and that's Angry Angelinos ask, where are our leaders? And, basically people are tired of watching their homes and communities burn while leaders focus on those political optics we hear so much about instead of practical solutions. Ron, talking about that, we've touched on this a number of times, DEI priorities over meritocracy. Right? I mean, that's so common. We even did a podcast on DEI burnout. We've done one recently. I don't know the episode number, but we're talking about how a lot of businesses are scaling back on DEI, right? So, you probably saw this too, Ron, but DEI initiatives have been at the forefront of many organizations and government policies in recent years. And the recent California fires have highlighted some negative outcomes associated with these initiatives, particularly in crisis management. Going on a tangent here, but Fire Chief Kristin Crowley, she was appointed in 2022 as the first LGBTQ plus person in that position. She declared that her top priority and wanted to make the department more diverse. And if you see pictures of those in charge, she did that. That's great, but that was her number one priority, and there are issues with that.
Yeah, I think number one, you said it, priorities, but there are some positions that you do have to look at strength and the ability. Firefighters have to carry someone maybe down a ladder, and that's the bar. You got to raise the bar on that. I'm all about hire whoever is the best candidate. You said it, it's meritocracy. Unfortunately, we're starting to come back to that. Yeah. But when it almost seems like a religion, this is how we have to do it. And you're not thinking about the number one priority. And I think it's in the title, firefighter.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, let's be honest. If I tried to carry someone out of a window, they'd end up with a broken neck on the ground. That's just, it's very difficult. So we have to have all of those things, in focus when we're hiring, right? So the focus on inclusivity can sometimes create an environment where, opinions or alternative strategies are not fully considered. And this stifles innovation and adaptability. And we've talked about this before, Ron, qualities that are vital during a crisis where conditions are constantly changing. That is what we need to be looking for. The need for swift action that can be compromised when discussions become overly focused and decisions become overly focused on inclusivity rather than the immediate challenges at hand.
Next, we're going to talk about the lack of preparedness. In addition to misplaced priorities that we've talked about, there were communication issues. Social media was flooded with people saying, I don't know if my house is on fire. Other people saying, I don't know if I'm supposed to evacuate. Can you imagine the confusion? And you can see probably fire from your window. So that is one of the things when you're a first responder that you're taught is effective communication.
Right. Absolutely. And the state had ample warning signs and resources available. Yet when the flames roared to life, the response seemed reactive rather than strategic. And again, there's no excuse for that. And this raises a critical question. How can leaders prioritize prevention over reaction?
Exactly. And the number one podcast in America, Joe Rogan, in June 2024, literally did commentary talking about the misplaced priorities of the California's firefighters.
Yeah, he did. It's wild.
It's crazy.
Yeah, he called it. Yeah. What did he call it? Performative governance,
Performative governance. Yes.
Yeah. It's so true. And he's not wrong. This kind of leadership failure, it really only exacerbates the problem. And I saw, was this today or yesterday, but author Michael Schellenberger, he recently was on Jesse Waters, and he revealed really some shocking details about the lack of preparedness. He stated that firefighters are quote unquote pissed because they should have been mobilized as early as January 3rd to prepare for what the experts knew was going to be a high-risk fire season because of those winds. And instead, leadership dragged its feet, and now the consequences are catastrophic.
If you're listening, brace yourself for this. He also pointed out there were 100 fire engines sitting in garages. They had never been fixed and were not ready to deploy.
I saw that video too.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
This is just a clear failure again of priorities or misplaced priorities. Let's put it that way. These are resources that could have saved lives, and yet they were neglected.
They were neglected because the budget cuts, and so they were sitting there waiting to be fixed, but they didn't have the fiscal resources to do so. So there we are. And it's really enraging, Ron. Firefighters are putting their lives on the line every day, and they're being let down by leadership that prioritizes politics over practicality. And Schellenberger's insights really underscore how preventable this crisis could have been if resources had been allocated properly. Oh, I have to bring something up too. I know this isn't your jam, but Meghan Markle, she was doing talk about performative, her photo ops. Did you see what she was out doing?
I saw social media. Yes.
So this is performative governance at its finest. But so Meghan Markle, she recently made headlines all over the place for flying into LA to hug wildfire victims. She was doing these long embraces, bringing along a full camera crew to capture the moment. And she has been slammed. Critics are slamming her for what they say is this phony concern and turning tragedy into a PR opportunity. And she's not the only one that's done it.
Yeah, she's walking photo op.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, people are dealing with this life-altering devastation, and they certainly don't need photo ops. They need genuine support, resources, and solutions, basically.
Yeah.
Not someone using, their pain as a backdrop for a photo op. And Kristin, I just want to emphasize one more time, we are not at all talking about firefighters. As a matter of fact, those firefighters, a lot of them haven't slept. I'm sure they breathe the air and all this other stuff, but they could have had a bunch more trucks. This could have ended for them as well. Not only the victims, the first responders could have had it easier, but now they're having to work extra hard to make up for all of this that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, they sure are. I want to pivot over to, the fire marshal's warning was ignored. That's another element. And, just really adding to the controversy, the fire marshal publicly called out city leadership for their lack of preparedness and mismanagement. And he highlighted the glaring issues in resource allocation and the absence of a coherent evacuation plan. But instead of addressing his concerns, city officials reportedly attempted to silence him. That sounds about right.
Hmm.
And it was so bad that he was nearly fired for speaking out.
Yeah, his credibility was completely attacked. It's like we're living in a time where, the photo ops are important or
Hmm.
looking good, and then whistleblowers become the enemy.
Right.
And it's just leadership at its worst,
Right.
people.
Right.
Take notes. This is what you don't do.
Yeah, exactly. You probably did not watch this show, but there was a show called The Hills. And one of the stars, actually two of the stars, are suing the city of Los Angeles, Heidi Montag and Spencer Pratt. Now they're suing the city of Los Angeles, and Spencer did not hold back on his reasons, and he's been very public about this. And he does have a large following, so it's really helped them get the word out. But he's accused city leadership of negligence, and he lived in the Palisades. So he's citing poor infrastructure and mismanagement as the culprits behind the devastation. And in his words, he said, "Our family and our community deserve better than failed leadership that prioritizes politics over people." I appreciate him for doing that.
Yeah, that's a bold move for somebody there. And it's about
Mm-hmm.
time that some more people with influence begin to
Yes.
take a stand in Los Angeles. They know the truth, and,
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to throw blame
Yeah.
even on Trump, which I thought was quite interesting. But
Yeah.
um, leaders are failing their communities, and we encourage everyone listening, even if you're not a Californian, say
Yes.
something, do something. It's time to hold leaders accountable. We've been saying that
Yeah.
for a long time now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, that's a powerful statement, Ron. These lawsuits might just be the wake-up call that Californians or California's leadership really needs. Speaking of someone with a platform, Caitlyn Jenner also spoke out, and that's another voice to add to the list. And she called out California officials, stating that the wildfires have exposed systematic issues in leadership. And she went on to point out outdated infrastructure, mismanaged water reserves, a reactive approach to problem solving as key failures. I would say I agree. She also went on to describe California's leadership as being too focused on political optics rather than practical governance. And, Jenner went on, or Caitlyn, we all know, used to be Bruce, went on to further say that she hopes these wildfires serve as a wake-up call for Californians to rethink their political choices. Now, Caitlyn Jenner has been very openly conservative, even as Bruce. So that has not changed.
Yeah, and I do think you can definitely see the political lines.
Mm-hmm.
Caitlyn Jenner speaking up identifies as a Republican. And so it's a shame that we put politics over these priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And but
Yeah.
again, thank goodness that some people are speaking up.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about a little more about the communication breakdown. I know you were mentioning that a few segments ago here, but gosh, this one was bad.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about the confusion, and anytime the result of poor communication is either confusion or people get hurt in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So communication is supposed to be, especially in this situation, life-saving, informative, healing, hope, those kind of things. Warnings, of course, but
Right.
Based on this poor communication, it's just made everything worse, which is very sad.
Yeah, and you were a first responder before you went to work for the government. So you know firsthand how important that communication is during a crisis.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
so now,
yeah.
Kristin, let's get into accountability and response.
Mm-hmm.
We can't overlook response efforts. When the fires hit, firefighters and first responders worked tirelessly. But were they adequately supported? And, that's the question that we're asking. I don't want to keep saying it, but we applaud the firefighters and the team that's worked so hard and volunteer. By the way, there's firefighters from other states. There's all kinds of, we pull together as Americans. We just need to hold those leaders accountable.
Right. I know in Oregon we sent, I believe, at least 50 engines over there. And so that was pretty cool. Yeah. There was a whole situation going on with that too, where they didn't let them actually start fighting fires for 24 hours. Of course, they're saying that's misinformation, but I'll leave that there while they work out the details. But leaders must ensure that those on the front lines have the tools they need to protect lives and property. That's just super frustrating. Okay.
Yeah.
Proactive planning. We've talked about this. This is a leadership podcast. We need to touch on this. Leaders need to anticipate challenges and create comprehensive strategies that prioritize prevention. That should be the goal everywhere. Governor Newsom and California's leadership, they were warned. They were warned by Trump. They were warned by many others about the need for forest maintenance, and they ignored these pleas, probably because of who it was coming from. I don't quite understand that with the fire marshal, but they ignored him nonetheless.
No, it's very true. And not only priorities, but you said it, the word is proactive. This is not like an unforeseen, even an earthquake. I mean, you can be ready to a certain extent, but this is something that was so predictable. If you probably interviewed anyone in California, 90% would have said, yeah, we're probably going to have more fires.
Right.
So this was definitely a derelict of duties. And on multiple facets of leadership. So we got priorities, we got a failure to be proactive, and then we have the communication breakdowns that we've already said. And it makes me wonder, think about this, Kristin. This is just what we've heard. This is from news articles we pulled. Can you imagine being on the front line? I wonder how confused some of the first responders are. It's got to be the same.
I know. It has to be. And you probably saw the Californians or anyone impacted gets a one-time payment of $770. That's been a big joke. And I know that that's what FEMA gives, and that's standardized with them. But where do Californians go from here? And, as we reflect on these events, it's essential to hold our leaders accountable while also encourage them to learn and grow. I think in this instance, they just need to be fired. But leadership is about serving the people. And I think a lot of leaders forget this, and they think that everyone is, for their being used at their disposal, really. But they're there to serve us and respond to our needs, and especially in a time of crisis.
Yeah, and Kristin, I've heard different experts talk, but the ocean is right there, and they said, they were talking about how salt water would destroy all the equipment. He said not in a day's use or 2 days use. So when you've got water all around you, and there's other stories of water shortages that could have been prevented. We won't get too far into that, but they need to experiment and find out, is there a way that we can filter this water better? Or is it safe to use for a couple of days without destroyed equipment because all these houses are being destroyed?
Right.
So there's so many things that, they're going to have to pull a team of bright people who are not politically motivated, and they're going to have to come up with a plan. Now they have to rebuild, but guess what? They could be in the middle of rebuilding and another fire hit. So they've got to get some proactive, smart leadership.
Yeah.
And I appreciate everyone for sticking with us, and I know Kristin does as well. We wanted to hammer some points, but I want to encourage you that the same things we're talking about can help your business. It can help your organization. And, I've told the story many times. I don't want to be redundant about hurricanes when I was Academy director and how we kind of screwed the pooch on the first one. And then after that, we put together a proactive plan, and things improved drastically. But you got to listen to people, the experts, the subject matter experts. You got to get the brightest people in the room and develop a plan.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if people were coming on here, they probably weren't, because they know we are a leadership podcast. As you can tell, we didn't go and break down every single detail and the timeline of what took place here. We're pulling out the themes of failed leadership, and then how you can be a productive leader that doesn't end up with your name plastered all over the headlines, right? For failing at this level. So it's important that we all understand that, leadership is weaved throughout everything we do. And there are ways that you can do it right. And unfortunately, what we see in the headlines is a lot of failed leadership. We're here to break that down, but then also help folks avoid that in the first place.
Well said.
All
Be the
right.
leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.